Ambassador, thank you so much for joining us on BBC News. We've heard that U.S. President Biden and Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu have held a phone call. The U.S. says it is surging military assistance to Israel. What role do you think the U.S. should be playing right now? Are you happy with the level of support that you're seeing?
Good to hear from you, Simi. I want to say, as a historian who has researched the history of the U.S.-Israel relationship, as someone who's been involved in that relationship at the senior level for many, many years, I have never heard a speech like President Biden just gave at the White House, and the president, in the presence of Vice President Harris, in the presence of Secretary of State Blinken. I've never heard anything like it. Going back to President Nixon in the early 1970s, or even President Johnson in the 60s. It was unequivocal support for the state of Israel, categorical condemnation of Hamas terror, and basically giving Israel a green light to proceed with its operation, which is very likely to involve a ground operation into Gaza, with all of the complexities involved in that. Okay. The president even seemed to anticipate the international condemnation of Israel as that operation proceeds by saying, at the end of the day, Israeli forces operate according to the world rule of law, as do American forces. Hamas does not.
Ambassador, I just want to follow up saying that Secretary of State Antony Blinken is also, according to the State Department, going to be visiting Israel in the coming days. What do you think that shows? How significant is that?
It's very, very significant. Everything was significant. The president basically put American power at disposal of Israel's defense. He has actually not just spoken about this, he has moved naval forces from the Sixth Fleet closer to the Lebanese coast. That's including the aircraft carrier Ford. He has moved elements of the Fifth Fleet through the Straits of Hormuz. That's obviously demonstrating opposite Hezbollah and opposite Iran. And again, his warning was clear. The president said that no state should think that they can, join in the fight against Israel. And that he said at something that I didn't expect him to say, Simi. He basically said that American naval forces would use power, would use their force. My assumption was that they would maybe participate in missile defense against Israel, but this was something very, very different.
And I just want to jump in there because you talked about the likeliness of a ground offensive now from Israel. And you talked about the complexities that involves and the possible international condemnation. We do know that there are more than 2 million civilians living in the Gaza Strip. And just today, the EU foreign policy chief, Oren, basically said that the EU opposes a total siege of Gaza and said that Israel can defend itself, but it has to follow international law. Cutting off food and electricity is not in line with international law. What do you say to that?
I say that it actually isn't counted with international law. During World War II, the United States cut off every source of electricity and elements to Nazi Germany and to Imperial Japan. We are in a state of war. And that was a very interesting and significant decision by the Israeli government yesterday. It's the first state of war we have been in since 1973. And under the rules of war, Gaza becomes now a hostile country. It becomes a belligerent country, not just a strip. And the citizens, yes, we're not going to commit, what would be considered under international law crimes against those citizens, but we have every right to blockade that strip. And I think
cutting off electricity and food to the civilians, again, more than half of those 2 million civilians are children.
I assume that if it ever reached that crisis level, food would be supplied. And that has always been the practice in the past. And I was actually in charge of the Gaza situation and the transfer of food to Gaza for about a year for the Israeli government. There was never a shortage of food, never a shortage of medicine. There are international organizations like the Red Cross that can handle it. But we have the belligerent right to blockade an enemy country, and that's what Gaza is right now.
And Ambassador, final question before we go. A ground incursion would obviously be extremely bloody for both sides, and it would be a larger conflict than what we're even seeing now. Are you concerned about what we might see in the coming days and weeks ahead?
I am very concerned. I think it could, as the president indicated, it could definitely devolve into a multi-front war involving Hezbollah in Lebanon, perhaps Iran, perhaps all other pro-Iranian proxies in the region, in Western Iraq, and even in Yemen. And that is why the president's message was so important. He was basically warning all of these countries, these elements that serve Iran, not to get involved as Israel pursues the goal of ridding the Gaza Strip of Hamas. That Cindy, that's our right as a nation. We have suffered an attack unlike anything experienced by the Jewish people since the Holocaust. In American terms, and you're sitting in Washington, this would be about 15, 16 times a greater proportionate number of casualties, of mortalities, than
Okay.
that suffered by the United States on 9/11. And so this is our right. We're going to pursue that right. We're going to defend ourselves, and we're going to rid the Gaza Strip of Hamas.
Ambassador, thank you so much for joining us today on BBC News.
Pleasure.